Alex, do you hear the birds?
I do. This means we are outdoors. This is our episode about movies that shaped our view of the outdoors. This is Alex from Los Angeles.
And this is Karen from San Francisco. Welcome to Movies That Shaped Us. We're two longtime friends who grew up on opposite ends of the globe with very different backgrounds, but were both shaped and are still being shaped by the movies we see and love. In each episode, we'll cover a topic around important people, places, events, and moments in our lives, and then explore it through three of our favorite movies. So, Alex, you already teed up our outdoor episode today. Yeah, what is your relationship with the outdoors, and how did you think about this list?
This was a fun one to think about because I think this episode actually, when I was putting the films together and really thinking about the outdoors, to me, the movies really did impact what this meant. So
Mm,
when I think of outdoors, I don't mean outside. I grew up in the greater Boston area, definitely like a suburb. So yeah, I would go outside or go to a lake or something that was nearby. But to me, outdoors always meant a place where humans don't really live. Like we're the guests in that place. Like it's not an environment that humans have, I don't know, civilized. So for me, that was always the Arctic, the Yukon, Alaska. That was always to me, every
mm,
time I say outdoors, that's what I would think of. And also, too, like I'm not really like that's not an environment where I feel at peace in. Like I'm definitely more of a beach and the ocean. Like that's where I feel like I am connected to it. But when I
mm,
go to these other places, not that I've been to the Yukon or Alaska, but really like, the middle of nowhere, like woods area, I don't feel it at home. I feel like I'm a guest. And I think to me, like that's what the outdoors is. It's a place where humans really shouldn't be. And what is our relationship with that place? How do we sometimes think we can live there and be there, but really like nature's always has a leg up on you in that place. So that's sort of how I approach this. So yeah, spoiler, like all my movies take place in kind of the same place and actually are randomly all true stories too, which I think also
mm,
speaks to my like obsession with this part of the world and viewing this as like the outdoor nature thing that I really don't belong in. What uh
mm.
what about you? How'd you think about this?
That's how I would define the outdoors too, which is like, not just going out, but, as an army brat growing up in India, we moved quite a bit, but,
Mm-hmm.
you always end up staying in the same kind of army cantonment areas. So,
Mm.
even though we were moving and our surroundings, the climate, the soil, all that was constantly changing,
Mm.
our immediate environment still sort of felt the same because we lived in army cantonment areas. And
Right.
I don't think I would classify myself as an outdoors person at all, especially not growing up. Like it was not
Mm-hmm.
something that was on my mind. So I think some of the movies that I have on there kind of show that my admiration, but also maybe fear of
Yeah.
that from a distance. But then
Mm-hmm.
I think as I've grown older, especially living here, and California has this amazing outdoors. I also lived in
Mm-hmm.
Seattle, amazing
Mm-hmm.
outdoors over there. And I think I've sort of learned and grown to appreciate what that has to offer. So there's a bit of a progression, I think, in my look at the outdoors. But yeah, I'm far from being an outdoors person even
Yeah.
now. I think way better than I used to be.
Yeah.
I would say. But yeah, I do subscribe to what you're saying, which is that I do see myself as a guest.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I think my relationship has evolved of
Mm-hmm.
being, like I said, fearful to kind of feeling like a guest to now starting to find some sort of peace and harmony as well,
Mm.
which it's just so funny to me. Like 20 years ago, I would have never imagined that, oh, it's like a Sunday morning and I'm just gonna go for a long hike in the woods and that's gonna bring me joy of
Uh-huh.
some sort. This was not on my mind.
Oh, and now it
20
is.
years ago.
Now,
Now it
now you
is.
like long walks in the woods.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay. Cool. Well, great. With that, why don't we jump into the list then? So, what is your number three film that shaped your views of the outdoors?
So my number three is a little movie called Jurassic Park from 1993,
Very little. Yeah.
directed and very little, directed by one and only Steven Spielberg, starring Sam Neill, Laura Dern, Jeff Goldblum, Richard Attenborough. Quick log line if anybody doesn't know what this movie is about, which I can't imagine. But a pragmatic paleontologist touring an almost complete theme park on an island in Central America is asked with protecting a couple of kids after a power failure causes the park's clone dinosaurs to run loose. What a weird description, but sure, yeah. So I think like a lot of people, especially kids of our age, in the early 90s, like this movie was a phenomenon no
Hmm.
matter where you were. I mean, I still have like vague memories of just sitting in the theater and being totally wowed and just in awe of what this movie was. So I think to me, this, like I was saying as a kid, like captures that emotion of excitement and thrill of just like entering Jurassic Park in the
Hmm.
movie, and also in my mind entering a world which just felt so far from me, like lush green forests and outdoors, the marvel of looking at these ginormous creatures, which again, when you grow up in India, there's a lot of flora and fauna around you.
Right,
So,
right.
so you don't, maybe I took a lot of that for granted. I know so many people would visit and they wanted to go and look at the elephants or what have you. And
Yeah.
it's not like the elephants were in my backyard, but they were, I mean, this stuff was accessible, it wasn't
Mm.
so far away. But I think seeing dinosaurs who are larger than life in this movie, like that feeling of awe was irreplaceable. So I think that's what this movie represents to me. And then, of course, as I've grown older and watched it again, it sort of brought up more, complicated, interesting themes with our
Hmm.
relationship as humans with the outdoors and nature, which I mean, I'll get into that. But yeah, curious what's your memory of this movie, watching it the first time?
Yeah, this I was 11 when this came out,
Yeah,
and when I was that young, there are few movies I remember seeing for the first time, and this I have very vivid memories of going with
same.
one of my friends and then his sister to this specific theater. I remember everything about it, and leaving, and we were just like, "Oh my gosh, what did we just see?" And like you said, this movie is a cultural phenomenon even today and stands the test of time. I mean, if anyone hasn't seen it, I highly recommend it. And there definitely are a lot of themes here about the outdoors, and sort of what I was touching on and how I view it as a place that humans are a guest and they should
Mm-hmm.
they shouldn't be. This is sort of the extreme of that because they're creating a world that doesn't exist anymore with flora and fauna that are extinct, bringing back animals that are extinct, and thinking we're that they're the guests in our world, when
Mm-hmm.
actually it's kind of the reverse. Like nature does win in the end. Like the humans have to leave Jurassic Park. Like
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't work. And that's interesting that you bring up, having elephants being, it sounds like sort of normal for you in a way. Like they weren't exotic because you would see
They
them
weren't
quite often.
exotic. That's the
Whereas like
word.
for me, like I barely saw elephants in a zoo. So I get, you need to go to a extinct animal to be awed by it, because you're used to the things that would awe me as a kid who grew up in Boston. Monkeys probably walking around too all the time. Like that would
Yeah.
be very, like, that's exotic to me. And I get why this movie then captures like something that the feeling that me feeling seeing an elephant would be like you seeing a velociraptor or something, probably.
Yeah, exactly. I will say though, like watching this movie again in preparation for this after a
Uh-huh.
long time, it had been, I don't know, 10 plus years, I think, since I'd seen
Oh,
it.
okay.
Uh, it felt a lot slower to me. And I don't know, it's still very enjoyable, but it felt a lot more like a kids movie at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe this is also partly because the cultural sort of footprint of this movie is kind of larger than life.
Right.
So it's so memeified and it's so in the zeitgeist, always has been. So maybe that's sort of part of it. But yeah, just like the reaction shots and whatever Laura Dern is doing in the movie, all of that, and also Jeff Goldblum, like all his lines about what are you doing, and
Right.
creating this thing, like they're very on the nose from the get-go.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's very much, it sort of felt very on the
Oh
nose
yeah. Yeah.
and kind of slow too in some ways. And so I don't know, it was an interesting rewatch,
Huh.
not what I had in my mind watching this 10 years ago, and obviously as a child. Like I guess
Hmm.
its memory sort of precedes what I feel about it now.
Interesting. Yeah. So I watch this movie quite often, so I
Yeah.
didn't have that. Like I think I saw it even last year before seeing it
Huh.
again for this podcast. Like I see this movie quite often, but yeah, it
Mm.
does have and I think one of the geniuses of the film is there is a slow build towards the big reveal of like the T-Rex is sort of what everyone's waiting for, right? It's on the
Yeah.
poster, and even when they first get to the encampment, it's not there. And they're like, okay, are we actually going to see it? And then stuff starts going wrong. And then all of a sudden the T-Rex comes in and it's like a big moment. But I think it's like 50 minutes into the movie is when you really start, like, the dinosaurs are sort of everywhere. And I like that he makes you wait with anticipation as an audience member, he being Spielberg, makes you wait as an audience member, because then it builds up the, oh my gosh, what is this going to be? What is this going to be? And something else too that is maybe hard for younger listeners to kind of understand is the impact of these special effects. So nowadays you watch this and it's like, okay, yeah, they're actually, the dinosaurs, kind of hit or miss, but it's fine. Like, we've seen this a billion times, and we're used to seeing incredible CGI creating things that don't exist. But back in 93, this was new. It really was. And I remember just being like, how did they even do this? Like, I didn't understand that as a kid. And I think the effects actually still hold up really well, but that sense of wonder and awe is tough, I think, for people who didn't grow up with this movie to understand, like, what that did. I mean, similar to what we were talking about in a couple episodes ago with Terminator 2, where those effects too were just like, what are we seeing? And Jurassic Park is very similar to that. When Dr. Grant first sees the dinosaurs, and this is incredible, like, Steven Spielberg does a great job of, like, showing people in awe, like the reactions of his his characters. And you see the awe on Dr. Grant's face, and then Laura Dern looks over and it's like, oh my God. And then finally you see the dinosaurs, and the audience feels that too. Cause you're like, how did they do this? They're asking, how do they actually recreate the dinosaurs? We're like, how did the filmmakers create this? And I think that is such a brilliant move in this film, which again might be lost on modern audiences, because they've seen even better special effects, and everything under the sun now has been recreated in CGI for better or for worse. But
no, I agree. I mean, I sort of remember as a kid watching this movie and feeling that maybe, like, a part of my brain sort of feeling that maybe the dinosaurs are real, because it was so real.
Oh yeah.
It was so larger than life that, like, practically you knew this is not real, but you sort of, at least I sort of felt that maybe they do exist somewhere. You know, that's how groundbreaking this was. And then this whole thing of, like, humans taking advantage, and like you're saying, like, flipping, like, that's obviously omnipresent in the movie. But I noticed that this time, and maybe this was always the case, that yes, there's that at play, obviously, but then Spielberg does a great job that you're also kind of along the ride to kind of understand how this was created. Like, how did Richard Attenborough create this? And that's pretty amazing too, that you do get caught up in the wonder of kind of the human creative spirit as well, And because I feel like if that was not set well in the beginning, I don't think the stakes would land on you the way they do. Like, how bad this is, and how exploitative this is, and how wrong this is. It wouldn't land on you in a big way if it wasn't set up that you almost kind of cheer and root for the fact that, oh my gosh, you've done this.
Right.
Just the way Dr. Grant and Laura Dern are also doing. Like, they're in awe of how have you done this? Like, the whole explanation of how the amber and this and that, like, all of that. I mean, they're sort of grossed out by it a little bit, but they're also kind of digging it a little bit. And I think you want your audience to be doing the same.
Right.
And that's pretty amazing.
No, and I think too what this movie does so brilliantly is exposition, which is something in a movie. Usually it's like there's a scene where some character kind of explains everything, and you're like, okay, I know you have to do this for the purpose of the plot, but here they put you in. It's because it's a theme park. You go through that Mr. DNA thing, so the cast is learning how they did this, but as an audience member, you're learning, and it doesn't feel like exposition. And the scene when they're going through all the different dinosaur encampments, and they say, okay, this is the Velociraptor. They do the Velociraptor does this. Because, back then I'd never heard of Velociraptor before. Everyone knows, like, the Brontosaurus and this movie kind of put Velociraptors on the map, and they explain why they're so dangerous before you even see them. But because it's done in this way that's so organic, when the stakes, when all of a sudden the dinosaurs are out, and you sort of you're like, oh no, the Velociraptors, they hunt in packs, and they're going to probably do this. Everything already. It makes it a lot more scary. And I think the exposition in this movie is just top notch, and how they weave in it and make it organic. It's just incredible. Yeah. One other thing too, that for me at least is a reading of this film too, is not only is it like, science gone wrong, which is sort of definitely a theme of this. Like, just because we can doesn't mean we should. I think that's the famous line by Jeff Goldblum's character. But I also had read this as a meta commentary on CGI as well. in the sense of, as an audience, you're like, wow, how did they do this with the dinosaurs? Oh, this is a great filmic technique, and this will be help movies. But actually, like, we've seen sort of where that's taken us
Right.
as a in film. Like, I think there's an over reliance on it, a loss of the practical element. There's some magic is
Right.
taken away, and they blended it so well, but it eventually gets out of control. And I think there's a way you could read this whole movie as us being excited and in awe of CGI, and then sort of it eventually eats us and takes over the whole industry and turns into this thing where it's like not special or interesting anymore. Which is just a reading I've always had on this film since about college when I was rewatching it once. I was like, oh, this is actually, you could apply this to filmmakers being in awe of something and then not understanding what they just unleashed, and now it's sort of you can't put that genie back in the bottle, unfortunately.
That's interesting. I never thought of that. That's so true. That is so true. But I think that's what I'm saying, right? That's you can apply this to pretty much any industry and any sort of technological advancement, is that should
Oh
we
yeah,
actually be there?
right.
And at some point you do admire and appreciate the human creative spirit, because that's sort of what keeps us going, and our curiosity and such. But then there are always consequences,
Right.
on a varying degree, some very bad to some benign. And we are once again at the precipice of that with all this AI stuff. Like, there
100%.
we are again.
Exactly. Yeah. And actually, on that note, when I watched it for this podcast, I noticed something I never noticed before, which is in the computer lab, when they have the hacker or not the hacker, but the guy who like is running all the computer systems, and then he eventually like shuts everything off to escape
Right.
with the samples. On his computer monitor, there's a picture of Oppenheimer. And I'm like, oh, they're trying to say that, like, Oppenheimer was, a famous scientist. I mean, I'm sure people know this now because of the new movie that came out this summer, but he was a scientist that's credited with inventing the atomic bomb, which, again, some guy who's driven to do something that humans had never done, but then look what it caused. It,
Right.
it killed hundreds of thousands of people, and now we live in this world that's under threat from nuclear weapons forever now. And I was like, oh, they're trying to say, like, this is sort of, again, an example of a scientist that went too far. And Jurassic Park's about science that's gone too far. Just something I've seen this movie like dozens of times. I'm like, oh yeah, there's a little Oppenheimer like photo right there on his monitor. Like they're trying to, the production designer, I think, made a little laugh when he or she put that there. I'm like, I know what I'm doing here. I thought that was a cool little Easter egg.
Little Oppie everywhere.
That's right. You can't escape him this summer, at least. Yeah.
That was Jurassic Park, my number 3 movie that shaped my feeling for the outdoors. What is your number 3, Alex?
So my number 3 is a film from 1983, 10 years earlier. It's Never Cry Wolf. This is directed by Carol Ballard, starring Charles Martin Smith and Brian Dennehy. The IMDb plot summary: a government researcher sent to research the quote-unquote menace of wolves in the north learns about the true beneficial and positive nature of the species. This is a film for me when I think about the outdoors. One of the things that this film touches on is like your assumptions or preconceived notions about nature and what nature is, and also of yourself, is not always right. And you have to go out and really experience the outdoors to understand you might actually to understand that you don't understand. Exactly. And I think humans too, like in this film, the government that is sending the researcher up there thinks that the wolves are killing all these caribou, and they want to kill the wolves to prevent the caribou from dying. And then he finds out in his research, this is actually based on a true story, his research, that the wolves are not killing the caribou. I mean, they are, but killing only the sick ones. They're not surviving on caribou, they're surviving on mice, and that really the threat is the humans and hunting the caribou. And these are all things that the scientists assumed wrong. And you have to kind of go out there and discover that to realize that nature is not what you think. What was had you seen this film or heard of this film before?
Never heard of it. I'd never seen it. Yeah, really enjoyed watching this one. And also, like, for kind of a lesser known movie, I was kind of wowed by the scale of it and how it's put together. Like, absolutely stunning. I mean, there's so many kind of these epic, outdoor nature movies done by big studios and big name directors, and I'd never heard of this director before. So I think that was pretty amazing. And then, but yeah, I think the central sort of premise of that's exactly what you said, which is that you have to be out there, experience it. But once again, they do a very good job of showing the kind of the bumbling idiotness of humans, because they're total kind of, out of their comfort zone in this area. But then also it celebrates their tenacity and, the will to keep learning and understanding, to the point that he's eating rats
Right.
to,
Right.
see that, okay, can this actually work? Like, is my hypothesis true? So I think it really
Hmm.
shows that too, that, humans are willing to kind of try, and that's why humans are who they are. They
Right.
keep going. So I thought that was very, very cool. And then the relationships he strikes with kind of the native people and all,
Hmm.
like, I thought that was pretty incredibly shown as well, because
Hmm.
those people probably understand nature a little bit better.
Right.
I mean,
Right. That is their
even
home,
though, yeah,
basically,
that is
in a
their home
way, even
in
though
a
they
way.
know, yeah, they know that they know that it's nature's not like there's animals and there's nature and then there's humans, but they've
Right,
known to coexist, but that we're still not part of that
right.
world
And they know that,
necessarily. And they know that. They definitely know that. Right.
as
They know
opposed
about the
to
balance.
the normal human who just shown up there
Right.
doesn't know that. So I thought that kind of learning and mentorship piece is also pretty cool. So
Hmm.
yeah, really enjoyed this one.
Yeah, I think one thing that this movie touches on too, which some of my other films that I bring up will touch on as well, and something that I do think about the outdoors is you go to a place that you are the guest. There's a lot of isolation. Like the
Yeah.
first part of this movie, he's totally by himself, and at some point you think like, is he going to die? And he might have died if that Inuit hadn't found him. But that part of that helps you kind of like look inward and discover new things about yourself too. And he talks about in this movie how he wanted to go into the wilderness to become a new man. He says in the beginning that was one of the reasons why he wanted to do this. And at
Mm.
the end, he mentions the place, the time that he spent there gave him a sense of wonder again, like a child. And this,
Mm.
that wow, the world is so amazing. And those are brought together brilliantly in this crazy sequence in the film when he's completely naked running
Mm-hmm.
around this caribou herd as the wolves
Mm-hmm.
are like trying
Pretty
to
amazing.
pull off like the ones to the caribou that are sick to kill. And he's that is the nature is sort of awoken within him. Now it's again, he's still a human, so it's not like he's became the wolf. But that moment you really think of, he looks like a new, like he's
Mm-hmm.
reborn, like he's nude. Like when you enter the world, you're nude. When you get born, he's now being reborn as part of the nature. And that sequence, like similar to the famous sequence from Dances with Wolves, the buffalo
Mm-hmm.
hunting sequence, like these are all real animals. How
Mm-hmm.
did they do this? And this guy literally is nude running around in this space that, like, I just don't know how this movie actually took 3 years to make. So
Yeah.
it was a major undertaking, which you definitely could see on the screen. But that whole sequence to me kind of sums up another message of this movie, that the nature the more time you spend in it, you unlock the sort of animal within or something,
Right.
which definitely that sequence shows.
Yeah, absolutely incredible. But then it also brings up questions of like, okay, now that you've had this awakening, what do you do with that?
Right,
And
right.
that's sort of the constant back and forth between, are you a guest or are you not?
Hmm.
And no matter it's our curiosity and our tenacity that wants us to keep learning and keep growing, which is great.
Right.
And at sometimes even being reborn. But then
Hmm.
where do you go from there? Do you just become off nature? Do you just move over there? And I think we'll explore this in some of your other movie
Hmm.
choices around
Right.
what happens when somebody does that and how does that really go?
Exactly. Right.
Or do you just come back and lead a quote unquote normal life? And
Hmm.
can you even do that? I don't know. Is the answer that you just stay away or go to the deep end? It's a very
Right.
interesting thing. And I'm always curious, like as I've grown older, I met people who they've gone on massive sort of hikes around the world and spent
Mm.
like months and months in total solitude. And I always wonder that
Mm.
how is it for you to come back and
Yeah.
just eat at a restaurant with like all
Right.
the other people and all dressed up and people with makeup and what have you? Like, what do you think about all of that? Can you just fit right back in? I don't know.
Right. Yeah. Do you forget that part of yourself that you discover? And I think for this
Mhm.
character, which again, this is based on a true story, and there was a book, I read this book, I think in like fifth or sixth grade, that it's based on, Never Cry
Mhm.
Wolf. And I love this book as a kid. I was actually obsessed with a lot of these Yukon stories like Jack London,
Mhm.
and this book, I think is again why I associate the outdoors so much with this part of the world. But I think for him, it inspired him to going on this journey to become sort of an ambassador to this part of the world. We're writing these children's or young adult books. He's written several of them now, and
Mhm.
I think that seems to be his takeaway. Was like, wow, this place is amazing. Obviously I don't want to live there, but I want to bring part of that, teach the rest of the world about the things that I learned about going on this journey. But it might have
Mhm.
is how it may have changed him. He's a famous Canadian, basically children's author now, or was. He's
Mhm.
passed away now, but I think this definitely touches on that. And one other thing I think that this movie does so brilliantly too, which sort of I haven't seen this movie in a really long time, actually, like probably 15 or 20 years, that I sort of forgot about the ending of the movie, where I do think it asks a lot of there's sort of an ambiguous questions and
Right.
answers that it asks. So yeah, we're the guests there, right? Where he's up there trying to understand and protect the wolves. And there's a sequence when Brian Dennehy sort of comes back as a guy who's going to start maybe some hotels or like really exploit the land. He cares for the wolves a lot, and you do too as an audience member. And then at the end of the movie, one of his friends of the natives, one of the Inuits, he ends up killing the wolves that this guy liked because he needed the money to help his family. And you're mad at that in the beginning. I was like, what? Oh no, the wolves are dead. Like, how dare someone do this? But you're thinking, well, wait a second. He did need that for his family. He's part of the indigenous population and they hunt. It's not like hunting is a bad thing if you need to, right? Sport and game hunting is one thing, but you're like not mad at him. And even the main character is sort of conflicted, I think. And I like that there's that questions of like, is it exploitation? What is exploitation versus something that is just part of the normal balance of how humans relate with nature? Yeah, the Inuits will kill the wolves and the caribou because they need them. And this guy needed them to buy new teeth and to help his family. So can you be mad at that or not? Like, it's just I totally had forgotten about that ending. And it was really like a gut punch because you really love these wolves, which, by the way, incredible animal acting.
Oh, beautiful.
Incredible animal acting.
And also amazing storytelling of establishing the relationship between the main character and the wolves. Like they're so far apart that those diary entries or monologues of him just observing them, like they do such a good job of establishing this relationship.
Right. And then they're dead at the end. And you're like, you want to be mad at the guy, but then like, I don't know. I actually don't know the answer to this of like how I really feel about it. And I think that's what's so brilliant about this movie. It's not trying to say, we're always exploiting the wild. We should just stay away from it. But some of these cultures, like that's how they've been, like you said, ingrained in the outdoors for thousands of years. And this is just how who are we to say you can't do what you've done forever, even though it's really tough to see these wolves that like he gives them names and they have cubs and you're really attached to them. And now they're dead because this guy wants teeth. But I get it, I get it.
Yeah, it's complicated, right? I mean, on one hand, you could say that, man is an animal too. So just the way the wolves are hunting for the caribou, man has to hunt for whatever animal to suit his or her needs as well. But at the same time, you're supposed to be a more evolved creature as well, with more means. Should you be doing that? Could you do something else? Like you can make a choice, which maybe other animals can't. But at the same time, you're also kind of an animal. So yeah, it's a complicated question. Maybe not so complicated for some people, depending on who you talk to, I suppose. But
fair, right?
But
right.
I agree. Like the movie does a good job of kind of presenting that in a way that you can sort of take. It's not preachy. You can take what you want to take from it.
Right. So, Karan, what's your number 2 film?
All right. So my number 2 is Life of Pi from 2012, directed by Ang Lee, starring Suraj Sharma, Irfan Khan, Tabu, and a bunch of other people. Quick logline: a young man who survives a disaster at sea is hurtled into an epic journey of adventure and discovery. While cast away, he forms an unexpected connection with another survivor, a fearsome Bengal tiger. So I think this movie kind of continues my progression and understanding whatever limited there might be in awe of the outdoors. And I think to me, this movie represents kind of the magical wonder, like truly, like some of the scenes of this movie in the water with all the stars and the colors and what have you, they're just so indelible from the first time I saw this movie. I think that's kind of the big piece of it. But then, like we've been saying, like man and humans are guests in the outdoors. I think this movie kind of really underlines that, but in a very different way, where the lead character here he's not fighting nature. He's not there to kind of tame it, although he does try to do that with the tiger a little bit. But for the most part, I mean, he's at loss essentially. But his approach to dealing with nature is through kindness and survival spirit and creativity, but it's through kindness. Like he truly develops this amazing relationship with this tiger. So it has like a very different take. And then the kicker at the end, spoiler alert, if this is all even true, which I think elevates the movie to, in my mind, like a fable-like status where you can apply this to whatever, this could be you being in the actual outdoors, or you just having a relationship with an animal or the local forest? Like, how do you approach it? Do you approach it with kindness or vengeance or control, or what? And how do you respect those boundaries? And you can really apply it anywhere, I think. So I think it's a amazing lesson on just relationship and friendship and kindness, but also taking a breath to admire the wonder and the magic of nature. So that's how this movie's always landed on me. How about you? I'm sure you've seen it before when it came
Yeah,
out.
yeah. I did see this when it came out in 3D, which one of the
Oh,
best 3D
really?
experiences. Oh my God.
I
Like
can only imagine.
unreal. This was right after the first Avatar came out, where then everyone was kind of
Mm,
rushing to 3D, and most of it was bad. And this was one of the few times I remember seeing a movie and being like, wow, Ang Lee, you know how to use 3D in the same way that James Cameron does as this incredible tool. And we were talking about CGI earlier with Jurassic Park. I mean, this is
mm-hmm,
how you do it. But yeah,
mm-hmm.
this movie, I loved it when I saw it when it came out. And I'd seen it maybe once on at home afterwards, but definitely the 3D. I remember being like, oh, the movie's not as impactful without that. And on this rewatch, I again just like think the movie's fantastic. It's a great tale, like you said, about a lot of different things, but a lot of it is around you can take the tiger as an allegory for a lot of different things. One of them could be the animals. If the tiger doesn't exist, maybe it's a representation of the animal side of all of us,
Right.
and of Pi when he's there and having to fight to survive. He has to sort of tame his animal instincts and sort of come into balance with that. Whether again, if the tigers represents that, or maybe the tiger was real, or there's also a big treatise, another film in this movie is about religion and faith, and that you have to
Hmm.
have the tiger could represent God or gods, or just that faith element that you can use it when you need it, and it helps you get through things. Is it there? Is it not there? Does it matter whether it's there or not? If the story can get you through and that faith and that belief gets you through, then it doesn't really matter, which is sort of at the end when they're saying which story's real. And it's like, well, which one do you want to be real? And it seemed like everyone, both the I guess writer that Pi was telling the story to, because the movie's during a flashback, as
Right.
well as the Japanese men who were investigating the shipwreckage, they chose to believe in the tiger story,
Right.
even though it doesn't make as much sense as his initial sort of, hey, look, my mom was on the boat and the cook was on the boat and
Right.
all those things. And I think you do want to believe the tiger story for a number of different reasons, even though you're trying to think, well, actually, it's a lot more realistic, the version that he tells at the end. But I think the film does a brilliant job of letting you decide
Right.
and hope that, because they're showing the fantastical, magical realism, I think, of those nature scenes when he's out on the water. There's an incredible shot once where it's like super flat and flat water, no waves
Mhm.
at all, and there's the reflection of the sun.
That's the iconic shot of this movie.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
And the sequence where there's the algae sort of like lighting everything up, and the whale
Yeah.
kind of comes out of the water, and it's just some of the most amazing shots of nature I've seen in a film, even though it doesn't look real. But that's not the point.
No,
It's
not the
not
point.
supposed to look real. It's supposed to have this magical realism, which nature is magical in a certain
Yeah.
sense, right? Sometimes I've been places where, like the Grand Canyon, for example, like you look at that and you're like, I know this is real, but it seems like it's not, because it's so majestic and so magical, and you're just there
Yeah.
like, this can't be real, but it is real. And I think that's what nature can be, awe-inspiring, 100% awe-inspiring, where you
Like,
think it's something that is delivered by the gods, or whatever, right? And I
yeah.
think this movie does a great job of capturing that in those sequences when he's out in the water. And one of the best shipwrecks. I mean, I think this and Titanic,
Oh,
in terms of the awe of how they show that, and just the power of it, and that amazing also shot when he's under the water and he looks down and there's the boat just sort of like falling
yeah.
under the water. It's beautiful. This movie is just
It's just
stunningly
stunning.
beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think the movie works because it not only is it stunning, it has like a lot of earned emotional weight. I think the
Yes.
work that they do in the beginning of the movie to set up these characters and
Mm-hmm.
these relationships and why this matters, and how animals are part of this household's life, and this kind of conflict between science and religion and
Mm-hmm.
thinking and feeling, and how this boy is sort of this a product of all of that, and
Right.
how this boy has so much defiance in him at a young age to say, oh, I'm not pissing, that's not my name, my
Right.
name is Pi. And it kind of
Right.
goes on, like all of those things which are kind of funny and amusing in the beginning, they all lend itself to why you care, and why
Mm-hmm.
then the magical realism, how he kind of reacts to nature, how he reacts to survival, all of that sort of then makes sense. You're totally invested and
Mhm.
you're with him, but you're also looking at him from a bird's eye view. Like that's the
Right.
kind of, I kept thinking about that. Like
Mm.
you're looking at this through his eyes, but then you're also looking at him because he's so small, right? That's the other thing.
Mhm.
Like we are so small in front of nature. Like literally, he's like a little ant in
Right.
all of this stuff that's happening all around him. And I think Ang Lee does such an amazing job. And also performance wise, I think
Oh, yeah.
this guy's like first film, and I don't know what he's done since. I haven't really followed his career, but
Yeah, me either.
the movie hangs on him entirely. Like if he fails, everything fails.
Mhm.
Also, the tiger animation,
Mm.
kind of incredible. I think it holds up.
Oh, for
Like if
sure.
that were bad, like everything falls apart because that's like a major chunk of the movie.
Exactly. Getting back to, CGI, like we were mentioning before,
Yeah,
the tiger is not 100% CGI, but mainly CGI. There were a couple scenes they use with the real tiger, but you kind of can't tell
right.
the difference. And the
You can't tell
acting
it.
that the VFX artists put into that tiger is just amazing. And too, like how the tiger kind of evolves and how you look at the tiger evolves
Mm-hmm.
over the course of the film. There's the beginning when the tiger, the kid is kind of in awe of the tiger. Pi is a little child, and his dad says, no, 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 he
Mm-hmm.
is a savage. Like look into his eyes, you'll see nothing. You don't relate to him. Animals are separate from humans. And then
Mm-hmm.
there's several scenes in the movie where you see into the eyes of the tiger, and that's funny, eye of the tiger, but into the eyes of the tiger. And over several of these sequences, the more the movie goes in, you do start as an audience member seeing like the humanity, for lack of a better word, in the tiger. Especially that scene when the tiger's, about to drown, and Pi's like, "Okay, it's fine. You'll drown. I don't care. I don't want you to hurt me." And he looks down, and there's like there's feeling and emotion in the tiger's eyes, whereas before,
Desperation, fear.
yeah, before when you were looking at the tiger, it just sort of looked like dead sort of doll's eyes in the opening sequence when he kills the goat. You're like, oh yeah,
Mhm.
this is just an animal. This is not. We're so different from them. But I think Ang Lee and the visual effects artists do such a great job of subtly putting emotions into this tiger to at the end, like it is incredibly sad when the tiger just walks away.
Yeah.
Much like like in Castaway when Wilson floats away. Like you kind of feel that of like I shouldn't care this much about this tiger, but you are just as emotionally invested in the tiger as Pi is at that moment because you realize that, yeah, we are actually, there is humanity in animals too. There is some of that. There are emotions there. I mean, the line is blurry, I guess, a lot blurrier
Yeah.
than what the dad, at least that's my takeaway from the film. Blurry when the dad said of like, there's animals and there's humans. And this is sort of exploring, well, there is something that connects all living things together, which is
Yeah.
something I think Pi realizes over the course of the film too.
Yeah. I totally agree. And there is that central sort of conflict as well while they are shipwrecked is that should I kill the tiger
Mm-hmm.
and that'll allow me to then be on the boat, not sort of be in the water, take care of my supplies and and obviously, not get eaten up by the
Right.
tiger.
Right. Right.
But then he says this in his monologue on his diary entry that in a way the tiger is the only companion he has and keeping him away and warded off is sort of it becomes a daily motivation for him.
Right.
So if you're just going to be all alone out there, maybe you'll die sooner before all your supplies and everything kind of run away, perhaps. So
Exactly.
that's sort of the other interesting thing of like, okay, I don't know if we can be friends, but can we coexist? And I think that's sort of the thing that we are connected, like you said, with nature and with our surroundings. We may not be friends, we may not understand each other, but we
Mm-hmm.
sort of need each other in some way or the other. And
Right.
that's sort of the grand food chain principle,
Yep.
or if you want to look at it from a faith angle, then I'm sure there are many allegories from a faith standpoint there too, that we are all sort of nature, God's creations, and we
Right.
all sort of have to coexist in some form or the other. Every religion has something
Mm-hmm.
around that. I'm no expert in this, so don't
Right.
come
Right.
at me. But so yeah, it's just so beautiful. And then yeah, like you were saying earlier, the majesty of nature. I have witnessed the bioluminescence
Oh
stuff.
wow, really?
Yeah, in
Oh,
Puerto
cool.
Rico, I did like
Wow.
a kayaking thing at night, and you actually see that when you put your hand in the water, the whole thing kind of lights up.
Whoa.
There's no way to describe that feeling. I mean, you
Yeah.
feel, yeah, you're totally swept up, and in that moment, if you don't believe in God, or if you don't believe in a higher power, then what do you believe in? Like you
Mm-hmm.
have to sort of explain this to your brain somehow, because it's just so unreal and so magical. And I think they do that, they capture it so beautifully.
in this movie
special effects
for sure.
standpoint, but like layering it with emotion, it never gets tired. Because I'm always wary of like shipwreck movies. Because after a while, I'm like, okay, we have to watch this one person go through this ordeal
Mm.
throughout the entire movie. I'm already clinching,
Uh,
before the movie starts that, oh, this is going to be an ordeal, literally.
right, right.
But this is like, it's very well paced, acted, and there's a lot of variation in terms of what he goes through.
Oh yeah, it's a masterful film. So you did not see this in 3D?
No, I wish I had now that you're saying it. Because I was thinking about that even last night, that oh, some of the stuff, especially like when he hallucinates, like all the like a circle of life sort of thing, like
Hmm.
all the animals are floating in the water and such,
Yeah.
like that stuff would be incredible in 3D, perhaps.
Yeah, if
And
it
the
ever
island
gets
too.
Oh yeah, if it ever gets re-released in 3D, I'd highly recommend you or any
Yeah.
listeners too that have seen this film but not in 3D to definitely do it. There's this one moment, and it's actually on I watched it digitally. I rented it,
Mm.
and they show this in even the 2D version where there's it's a 235, so there's black bars in the bottom and the top, right? Because it's letterboxed. And during this amazing sequence, which actually I think was the original teaser trailer for this film, he's there in the boat, and all of a sudden, this giant flock of flying fish are just jumping
Mm.
all into the boat. And there's one
Mm.
sequence where the fish jumps out of the frame and then over the letterbox. And you see that in
I
2D and
did
it's
see that.
cool. But my
Yeah.
God, in 3D, it's like, whoa, is it just actually coming out of the screen? Like literally, like, oh my God, it broke the fourth wall essentially. And it's one of those like, there are few amazing uses of 3D beyond Avatar and Avatar Way of Water, in my opinion. But this movie belongs with those two in terms of the what Ang Lee did with the 3D. So definitely, if it ever comes back in 3D, it's awe even to another level with what he's able to do. But the movie is just a great film. It really is.
Yeah, and also the India scenes in the beginning, like not that I've ever visited Pondicherry, I've always wanted to,
It
but
looked amazing.
looked amazing. And like often movies when they represent like another culture, it sort of feels very overly underlined. And
Mhm.
even though this is, but there's something about the narration of Irfan Khan's voice, or the
Mhm.
fact that the whole movie has like a fable like quality, that even India sort of feels like a bit of a fable place.
Right, right.
Its colors and how it's represented, like, and then the music, that score that
Oh,
won an Oscar,
yeah.
also
Great
does such
score.
an amazing job right from the get-go of kind of putting you in this space of like kindness and love and
Hmm.
magic and wonder. Like that's what I associate with this movie always.
And those are all things that I would also associate with the outdoors or parts of the outdoors.
Yeah.
There is that wonder, that majesty. Again, when you see certain things like the bioluminescence for you or like the
Mhm.
Grand Canyon, for me, it's a spiritual thing, but you're
Mhm.
not connecting with necessarily like a higher power or other humans. You're connecting with nature and you get that awe. And this movie just like hits that right on the head.
It totally does. All right. What is your number two?
So my number two, staying in the Yukon for me, is Grizzly Man, a documentary from
Mm.
2005. This is directed by Werner Herzog, starring Timothy Treadwell, or the subject is Timothy Treadwell. The IMDb plot summary: a devastating and heart-rendering take on grizzly bear activists Timothy Treadwell and Annie Hoodengard, who were killed in October of 2003 while living amongst grizzly bears in Alaska. So this movie
Mhm.
is a story of Timothy Treadwell, who was a real guy who did, like as his plot summary describes, go up to Alaska for, I think, about 13 years and every summer live amongst the bears in ways that were illegal, actually. Like he wasn't supposed to be in
Mhm.
these protected worlds or these protected lands, and basically was trying to become a bear, or he wanted to protect the bears, but he would get up close and be petting them, giving them names. They'd come up to him, and this was all documented. So he would shoot camera footage of this. And unfortunately, he was killed by the bears at one point. And this is Werner
Right.
Herzog's combination of, talking heads with people that knew Timothy, but then also his footage, which is some of the most
Mhm.
amazing wildlife footage you will ever see, because it was essentially shot, illegally. You're not supposed to get this close to
Right.
animals, but he's like petting foxes in the head. It's amazing. But for me, the reason why I just want to give some context to listeners who might not have heard this film. But for me, really, what this does is really does underline the point that while a lot of people, Timothy being included, idealizes the outdoors and thinks it's this place of magic, wonder, and harmony, a lot like what we were just talking about. Yes, there is a
Right.
side to that, but there's a savagery too. And if you forget about that, you could pay the ultimate price, much like he did, and was killed by the bears who he thought were his friends, but they're animals at the end of the day, and they're not humans. So this is a good stark reminder of that. So had you said you've seen this film before? What were your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I hadn't seen it, hadn't heard of it either, but I was just kind of blown away by,
It's one of my favorite documentaries of all time.
yeah, the movie itself, but then also just like humans as, we've been talking through the entire podcast of like how far would we go,
Right.
in
Right.
terms of our curiosity and I was using the word kindness a lot in the previous movie for Life of Pi. This person is not Timothy's not approaching the way Richard Attenborough's character is approaching outdoors in Jurassic Park to kind of tame it in a way or create something or control it and then ultimately sort of exploit it and make money off of it. No, like Timothy is approaching it with kindness.
Yeah,
And
he calls
he
himself a
genuinely,
kind warrior.
yeah,
And throughout the beginning, I'm the kind warrior
yeah.
of the Yukon. Yeah.
And he wants to be out there and be their friends, but the movie does such a good job of kind of once again letting you decide how you feel. There are points where you feel this person is deranged or totally crazy, out of mind. There are times when you're sort of in awe of his almost heroism that somebody will actually put himself out there. In other moments, you're admiring the kindness and tenderness he has for these animals and nature around him. And then at times you're like, you need to get out of there. What are you doing there?
Right. Right.
And at times you also question, is this even coming from a good place?
Yeah.
Like, isn't it selfish actually that you're encroaching and you're kind of plastering this whole thing as an act of, oh, I'm their friend. They never asked you there. Friendship is a two-way street.
Exactly.
You're just there,
Right.
and you just imagine that they're your friends. They didn't give you any such indication whatsoever.
Right.
So
Right.
maybe what happened is what you deserved it. So
Right.
it's such a varying kind of kaleidoscope of emotions that you go through watching this movie.
Oh yeah, I mean it's just a masterful again documentary because there are so many mixed feelings. Another theme I think that this movie touches on too is how people can use the outdoors not only to idealize it but as a sense of escape from who they are. I mean, this guy was very troubled, clearly, like it was an alcoholic, drug addict, a failed actor. So he hated in a sense like the human world, and there were scenes where he's just kind of yelling at the camera, complaining about the Park Service and how the humans don't care, and I am the better than everyone else because I actually care about these animals and all these things. And he's very troubled guy. And this was his therapy, but was it a healthy therapy? No, I would say definitely not. Like he needed he needed real help. And this was not helping him, even though he took on this air of like, hey, I'm not getting paid for this. I'm very poor. I'm going teaching for free in the classrooms with the kids. And he was very popular with kids, showing them all these bears. But yeah, it's still not right at the end of the day. And, he does pay the ultimate price. There's even a line in the film where they're interviewing a local Inuit who worked at this bear center. And he's like, look, like our culture's been here for 7,000 years. And there's a very clear boundary between animals and humans, and that we know never to cross it. And he did. And it's out of respect they don't cross that. It's not because they look down on the animals or feel that humans are better than the animals. There is a separation. And once you get too close to that line, it becomes dangerous. And when you step across it, you can end up dead. And unfortunately, he was there with his girlfriend too. And that's the most heartbreaking thing about this movie to me, is that she died as well, who was just there because she loved him and was supporting him, even though she didn't like the bears. She was scared of doing this. And that she's really the most innocent victim out of all of this. Not to say that he deserved it, but he was putting himself out there. He knew the risk and he was willing to die. He would say multiple times to his friends, like, yeah, if I die, this is how I want to die. And don't mourn me. But not really the case. And you definitely feel for, or at least I really did feel for her.
Yeah, I felt for her. But then also the other people who are like mourning his loss, like the other two women in the final scene. Even that's a complicated scene in my mind. Like, like
when they're throwing his ashes out.
Yeah, I'm like, should I be sad about this? I don't think so. Are you two even sad about this, or are you pretending to be because now you're on camera? Or, it sort of exposes so many layers of human emotion and, selfishness and greed and all of that stuff, right? Like, so yeah, this movie is very layered, I think. In my
Yeah, I mean, I've seen this several. I was one of my friends saw this at the time. I was like, you have to see this movie, so I got it on Netflix DVD back when that existed and
opinion.
rented it. I was immediately like captivated, disgusted, but also drawn into this guy. I mean, he's such a character, but the footage he gets is just unreal, like
Yeah,
of the
pretty
nature footage. But yeah, it's very complicated. I mean, I've seen this film probably like 4 or 5 times since seeing it originally back in like 2007, and just still blown away by it every time of just how it really gets at this very nuanced situation. I think what Herzog does so well, other than has one of the most amazing voices ever, so his narration like is like, you know, a knife through butter in like the best way.
Mhm.
But the way that he shoots this, where he'll have a scene where he's clearly telling the person, okay, you're here, you have to sign the papers, or look, you know, show me this his morgue report and talk about it, and we'll film it. And then when the person's done doing that, he leaves the camera on for like
Mm.
20 or 30 more seconds, and the person is sort of like, okay, I'm done acting, quote unquote.
Right.
And then he captures a real emotion.
Yeah.
And it's like, holy like that's like really reality. It's like, so I don't know if he probably did this on purpose, makes a very
Oh, yeah.
rehearsed scene, but then ends it and lets the person just then talk and express what they really think or feel, or they start emoting. Like in one scene, one of his best friends, like she just starts crying, and that's the most powerful pieces of the film to me. And then, I mean, he was filming, and there was actually, the camera was on when he was killed. So
Yeah.
there is audio of him getting killed by the bear, him and his girlfriend. And there's a scene in the movie, which is one of the most powerful scenes I've seen in any movie, fiction or nonfiction, honestly, where Herzog is listening to him get killed in front of his old girlfriend and current friend,
Mhm.
and just takes off the headphones. He's like, you should never listen to this. Destroy
Yeah.
this tape. This will be the white elephant in your room your entire life. And it's chilling yeah, I just can't. That scene just always stays with me of the way that he says it in such a matter-of-fact manner, and just her just there just starting to cry. And it's yeah, it's a devastating lesson again of like that boundary that you do not cross, that it's not out of disrespect, it's out of respect. And I think
It's out
that's
of
the piece
respect,
that he
actually.
didn't really, to your point, wasn't really their friends.
He's
It's
using them in a way, you could
he is.
argue, to escape from his own demons,
Yep.
and sort of, you know, forcefully including the animals and nature and outdoors, making them his accomplice.
Yes.
They don't want to be.
Exactly. None of them asked for this, and then, you know, he dies.
Yeah.
Well, so moving on from Timothy Treadwell, then let's get to your number one. So, what is your number one movie that shaped your views of the outdoors?
Yeah, so my number one is Brokeback Mountain from 2005. Another Ang Lee movie, which
Oh,
I did not plan it this way, but it just
double
happened to
Ang.
be. I
Yeah,
know.
double Ang.
Starring Jake Gyllenhaal, Heath Ledger, Michelle Williams, Anne Hathaway. Quick logline. Ennis and Jack are two shepherds who develop a sexual and emotional relationship. Their relationship becomes complicated when both of them get married to their respective girlfriends. Yeah, this movie to me kind of shows where I'm at with nature now for Inez, and then I guess for both of them and their relationship. Wyoming, which is where this movie takes place, is sort of this place of serenity and calm and peace, and it means so much to them. And yes, it's enormous. It's probably even dangerous out there, but none of them are out there to actually tame it or challenge it or befriend it. They're sort of peacefully accepting of the fact that we are just tiny specks in this area, and that's how I take it, that we welcome the fact that this space has provided us the solitude and the safety to just be together, which may not be allowed anywhere else.
Right.
For this relationship and for these two people. And the way I take that now is that, yeah, whenever I'm out amongst nature by myself or with people who I love, it's a chance to kind of almost give thanks to the fact that, oh, we are even here, and it's inspiring, it's joyful, it's calming, it's centering, and you really feel that, like, you know, for these two, this is where their relationship starts, but throughout the movie, it's almost like they feel so awkward and weird in their quote unquote real lives. And not just because, you know, they're not living their true selves and they're married to women and have children and what have you, but just even outside of that, like just putting this act of, you know, living the life of, like, you know, a normal human, just feels like an act, versus there's so much at ease and comfort with each other in the space that nature affords them. So that's how I take this movie. Of course, there are many other layers to the movie, but yeah, curious if you'd seen it before or no.
Yeah, I've saw this when it came out. It's actually one of my favorite
Yeah,
movies, a masterwork, one of the best
yeah.
movies of this century easily. But for me, in terms of the outdoors, I think what it represents in this film, and it does to a lot of people, is a sense of freedom. That this is
Mm-hmm.
the place where you're escape the expectations or trappings of the human world, and you can go
Mm-hmm.
to a place where you don't have that anymore, and then you can get what you really want, whether that's something within yourself, or in this example, it's the love that was denied them by the human world because this was set in the 60s, 60s and 70s. So, you couldn't be an out gay man at that time. And there
Mm-hmm.
was a cautionary tale of an out gay rancher that gets murdered
Mm-hmm.
because he was gay that they talk about in the
Mm-hmm.
beginning of this film. So it's that freedom and that self-discovery too. You get the
Yeah,
sense that especially Heath Ledger's character really, I think, didn't realize he had these gay feelings before. You get the sense that that experience sort of awakened that within him because he had the that freedom to have that introspection and self-discovery on their initial summer together, and that every time that is the only place that they feel they can be themselves. And
exactly.
nature does avoid that, right? Or can give you that, right? That sense of a sense of freedom. And the other piece that I think this movie does so brilliantly is that's also a theme of the Western, is the
Yeah.
sense of you go out west because that's the free space. The gunslingers can do what they want. And Ang Lee, or I mean, that's based on a short story, so it's not just Lee,
Right.
but the brilliance of this story is they're taking all these tropes of the Western and adding in another layer of these people are can be free to be who they want to be, but only out west, and and the cowboys are the most free, but that's when they can be, with the person that they love.
Exactly. Um, but then the flip side of that, which I think is very interesting as the movie develops, is that how that can also become a crutch, where
Right.
Jake Gyllenhaal's character is always asking him that, we can make this work, if you
Mm-hmm.
really want to. It doesn't just have to be this, one time, once a summer sort of thing. We can actually go do something. But for Inez, Heath Ledger's character, like this has kind of become what was freedom, like you put it, has now
Mm-hmm.
become a prison of
Right.
sort,
Right.
where
Right.
this is all I can do. This is the only place where I can accept myself and you to the fullest extent. Otherwise, I'm just going to go back. And yes, there's society to blame for that, but it's also you. You have to also
Totally.
take ownership because there's somebody else out there who wants this more and is willing to kind of walk with you, and
Mm-hmm.
and he doesn't treat him right, and their relationship goes kind of south. So yeah, it sort of explores that too, that how we as humans can kind of become prisons to our own freedom, if you will.
Definitely. I mean, that's a tragedy part of this.
Yeah.
I think if you understand the apprehension that Heath Ledger's character has of like, wait, we're not again, he saw this rancher get murdered because he was gay and he was afraid to bring that back into the quote unquote real world. But you want him to, and you're like, hey, like, why are you turning your back on the only love you're probably ever going to experience in your life?
Yeah.
He didn't have the courage, and I think that was also what drove Jake Gyllenhaal's character was so frustrated in it,
Frustrated.
because he
Yeah.
kept being like, "Look, I will do this. We will do this together. Let's do this. Let's do this. We'll go to Mexico. We'll build a cabin in Brokeback Mountain. We'll do all these things." He wanted to do that, and Heath Ledger's character was, to your point, I think, trapped by that feeling of freedom was only at Brokeback Mountain. It couldn't
Yeah.
be anywhere else, and he couldn't get over that throughout the course of the film, and that's the tragedy in the story.
Yeah. But that's also humanity, like
Yeah.
different people are different, and Jake is on a different level. He had those ingredients in him from the very beginning, because he's the one who makes a pass in the
Right. He does.
beginning.
He initiates. Yeah.
He initiates it.
Right.
So, he is working on a different plane in that sense. On the nature outdoor side, like this movie just captures the serenity and calmness of nature
Mm-hmm.
and that safety so beautifully. Like it's almost the opposite of everything that we've been talking about throughout this entire
Right.
podcast. Like
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
you want to be there so bad. Like it's
Mm-hmm.
just so stunningly beautiful. It's not magical
Right. Right.
realism. It's
Mm-hmm.
very real, but
Oh
it's
yeah.
it's enormous, majestic, but it's not surreal. Like it's very real. And I think
Exactly.
there's a difference in how that's sort of captured from the sounds and what have you, and just the quietness, and the score is amazing.
One of my favorite scores of all time. It's
Amazing.
so
Like
good.
I just a little, like the first two notes of
Oh my
that,
God.
that's all
Yeah.
you need, or at least what
Hmm.
I need to kind of, go back to just being in Wyoming. I've always wanted to visit just because of this movie, and hopefully someday I will.
It's a beautiful place. Like I've been
Yeah,
there, and
you've been?
it's stunning. But I think one of the things that really struck me in this viewing of it, which again I was thinking a lot about these themes of outdoors more than I normally
Mm,
do when I see this film, because I've seen it a bunch of times. It's one of my favorite movies. Is that it? The shots that they're able to do by putting these just absolutely stunning backgrounds behind these two characters as they're arguing or fighting, like
mm,
the drama is elevated because the
yeah.
scenery like elevates the drama. Like if they were just in their car arguing or in a room, you get the human emotion and maybe it'd be raw, but it like heightens this, not to the point of melodrama, but it adds like an
Hmm.
epic quality to their tale and their struggles and their emotions by having these stunning backgrounds of these mountains and the rivers and the forests. It just elevates the human condition by just placing it. It's not, like you said, it's not overly it's not magical realism. It's not dramatic. It's just, hey, this is just the nature. And I don't know who actually shot this movie, the DP, but the cinematographer did a great job of just letting the landmarks speak for themselves and then elevate these two performances, which I think are the best performances either of these
Oh,
actors have ever done. And I mean, the Heath Ledger stuff in this is just
it's
some of the best acting
unbelievable.
I've seen.
Yeah.
And I just really tragic that he obviously isn't with us anymore and that,
Hmm.
he couldn't continue his career. But like this performance is just unbelievable to me and just so,
Yeah.
so powerful.
It's like chilling in the quietest way possible,
Oh,
because
yeah.
just in his body language on his face, with like barely any dialogue, the entire pain and suffering, little bit of specks of joy,
Hmm.
and that prison trapping that we were talking about earlier, it's all just there.
Hmm.
And the whole cast, actually, even Michelle Williams
Oh,
is
yeah. And
just,
Anne Hathaway, they're both
and Hathaway as
fantastic.
well. Like everybody's absolutely incredible. So
Hmm.
yeah, I'm happy to be talking about this movie in this
Me
context.
too. I mean,
Yeah.
again, it's one of my favorite movies of all time, and there's so many different things that this movie tackles. Even there's, comments on toxic masculinity. I mean, there's
Hmm.
one of my favorite sequences when Heath Ledger's out at a barbecue for Fourth of July, and then these two sort of like typical toxic masculine guys saying these horrible things in front of his kids, and then he has to be there and protecting them. And this
Yeah.
incredible shot after he punches one of the guys to show like the rage that he has, and
Mhm.
asserting like the protectiveness of what it means to be a man. And he's standing there in this wide shot, and these fireworks are going off, and like framing him not in his like these feelings of rage, but also he's standing there as a cowboy with the cowboy hat on, and the other two guys were wearing sort of like baseball hats. And again, it goes back to touching on not only the themes of masculinity and his this rage that he has because he's keeping all these secrets, but what the American male means in the context of a cowboy. It's just that
Mhm.
one shot is just so brilliant.
Yeah, like I couldn't agree more. And that's his trapping too, like what how to be a man.
Right.
So yeah, it's society and everything, but it's also what you told yourself, and how do you sort of, and you see and as kind of bouncing off of that throughout the entire movie. Versus
Right.
I think Jake knows what being a man is.
Right. He's comfortable at
However he
least.
defines it. He's
Right. He's
comfortable in his
comfortable with his
space.
own masculinity and what it means to him, and Heath
Yeah.
clearly is not, and that's the struggle that he goes through the entire film. And I think at the end you don't even get the sense that he even knows.
No,
It's not like he gets his journey is not over. It's just I don't think he'll
no,
ever come to grips with the Brokeback Mountain experience, which is also it's
no,
sad
yeah.
about the ending too.
Yeah, but it's so heartbreaking to see, like, he has his shirt and everything at
Yeah.
the end, and he's sort of lonely, but there's also some sort of inner peace about that. I think
Hmm.
he's sort of accepted like what this is going to be, and the relationship with his child and everything is, yeah, this is a movie that haunts you,
Oh
it
yeah.
stays with you. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, Alex. So from the valleys of Wyoming, I don't even know if there are valleys.
There are valleys. There's peaks
The
and there's
valleys,
valleys.
peaks
Yeah,
and
yeah,
valleys.
yeah.
What is your number one movie that shaped your feeling of the outdoors?
And so we're going back to the Yukon, back to Alaska again,
Yep.
like I teased in the intro. So my number one film that shaped my feeling of the outdoors is Into the Wild from 2007. So this is a movie directed by Sean Penn, actually co-written by Sean Penn as well, starring a lot of big name actors: Emil Hirsch, Catherine Kinnear, Hal Holbrook, Vince Vaughn, Jenna Malone, Kristen Stewart, William Hurt, amongst others, just a really large cast. The IMDb plot summary: after graduating from Emory University, top student and athlete Christopher McCandless abandons his possessions, gives his entire $24,000 savings account to charity, and hitchhikes to Alaska to live in the wilderness. Along the way, Christopher encounters a series of characters that shape his life. And just to note, again, this is a true story about a real kid that did this. Unfortunately, it also ends with his death as well, much like the last film I talked about. And I read the book in high school, actually, and was loved. The book really hit me. And this movie, I think, just captures what makes that movie so brilliant, which is, this movie is a lot about how the outdoors, much like the Grizzly Man, Timothy Treadwell, the outdoors can be a place where you go to like purify yourself from the toxic sides of civilization. If you have a void in your life, you go to the outdoors to try to have that void be filled. But what I think Christopher learns in this film, and I believe this as well, the outdoors cannot fill that void, and only love and human connections can. So the isolation that he's seeking as his salvation is actually not only his undoing, but ironically, in the end of at least the movie, it sort of, he comes to this realization that actually the love from his parents that he never got is what was missing, and that's what he needed to pursue. Instead of going away from them, he should have been trying to connect with them. But there's a lot of other things I'll say about the film, but I just want to get your initial thoughts. Had you seen this movie before, and what was your takeaways from it?
Yeah, I've seen it before, and it hit me pretty strongly when I saw it. Hadn't seen it since. It's a pretty heavy and harrowing movie, and not something that I would put on my sort of rewatchable list, even though I watch a lot of movies that are very depressing and sad over and over again. But there's something about this movie that it takes you to a pretty dark, maybe lonely place. That's the thing, which is sort of makes it difficult to kind of watch it again. But it's masterfully put together. It held up pretty well on maybe third viewing or so in prep for this podcast. But yeah, you're absolutely right. That's the thing, right? Like, you can't be running away.
Right.
You have to face your fears, no matter what trauma you might have from childhood or what have you. You have to face it. You have to get real help. The thing that struck me the most on this viewing, which I don't think I remembered much of from my earlier viewings, was just the plight of the people left behind. The parents, the sister, all the people that he meets. Obviously, the Hal Holbrook scene is incredible. Gets him an Oscar nomination very deservedly. But that's the stuff that really made me so sad, that I'm like, yeah, you're on one hand poo-pooing on society and all its trappings and everything, and you want a better life and what have you, whatever higher moral grounds you think you're on, but you're hurting everybody. Sure, your parents did things to you, but it was a while ago also. And your sister, who's supposed to be your supporter in this, and poor thing, she doesn't even hear anything from him for years and years. And that part really hurt me this time, just kind of watching it. And then, of course, you feel sorry for him too at the end, because it's such a tragic ending. And like you said, like when he's dying and he has these visions of just his mom and his dad like hugging him, and bright sunlight and all of that is heartbreaking, so
yeah, I think that's the tragedy of this film too, that he, even as he's going through his journey, because he's not immediately in Alaska, he hitchhikes, like the plot summary says, across the country, meets all these various people and does build connections with them. I mean, Catherine Kinnear really does sort of take him on as sort of like a surrogate son, and is very concerned about his parents, and there's love that all these different folks are showing. And with the final one of Hal Holbrook really telling him, as this old man, he's like, look, the thing I've learned, the joy of life is human relationships. That is the joy. And he has to repair some relationships in his life. And that's sort of what he's going through. But he cares for Christopher. But Christopher still is pushing all these people away from him through this entire journey, because he's trying to get to this place in Alaska where he thinks he's going to find salvation. And yeah, the isolation can, like in the other movies we've talked about, bring about self-reflection and help you understand things about what you need. But I think what this message of the movie is too, that it is not the solution. Now, it might be part of their journey of finding what that solution is, but you're going to have to go back to civilization. You have to go back to the people that you love, or try to find love with other human beings and other relationships, because that's what's going to fill the void of love. Has to be filled with love. It can't be filled with what he was trying to do, which was kind of get away from it all because it was sick and twisted or not what he wanted. And you know, he thought being alone would give him that. And, you know, even actually tragically too, there's a scene at the end of the film too, when he writes in his book, and I don't know if this, I can't remember if this was in the book or if this is true, but he's getting sick, and he's at the end of the movie, he ends up in this bus in the middle of the wilderness in Alaska by himself. And he's reading, I think it's like some Dostoevsky. And in there, he puts in this line. He writes in, "Happiness is only real when shared." And that's as he's having these realizations, like, oh my gosh, like his sister loves him so much. You can tell with this heartbreaking narration that she's giving Jenna Malone throughout the film, and he just pushed it all away, unfortunately, and paid the ultimate price by dying. And you know, you think too that he must have learned this lesson in real life as well, because part of the film he like throws away his name and comes up with another name. Alexander Supertramp is like the name he goes by. So he's like giving away his entire identity in hopes of finding something else. And then at the end of the film, when he is, one of the last things Christopher did in real life was post like a message. He puts it next to his body as he's dying, and he signs it with his actual name.
Yeah.
So he's coming to realization of who he, you know, he's like, no, actually, I'm not going to run from myself anymore. This is what I need. I'm reaffirming who I am. But again, unfortunately for him, it was too late, because
It's too late.
he, you know, tussled with the wild, and we're not meant to be there, especially folks who grew up in civilization. Like, he's not an Inuit. He doesn't have that respect for the wilderness that the other, you know, basically the Inuit characters in Never Cry Wolf, or the one Inuit in Grizzly Man, when he's saying, hey, there's this boundary. We're part of nature, but there is a separation. He thinks that blurring that line or jumping over it will give him salvation, and unfortunately leads to his end, which is really sad but powerful too. And that's why I love this book so much. And I think Sean Penn just does a fantastic job with this film, even though it's a very hard watch. It's not an uplifting film, even though the message at the end of love and human relationships is so positive, but it's spun in such a way that's tragic because of what happens to Christopher in the film.
Yeah, the love and relationship part is the key one, but I also think the other thing is that you can't escape the work that you have to do on yourself.
Right, you're right.
You have to face your demons. You know, you have to kind of really get into it and figure out, why are you behaving and why are you thinking the way you are? And yeah, other people are part of it, but ultimately you have to kind of put in the work as well. So,
right. And he was running away from that, I think.
He was running away from that.
Yeah.
Exactly. I haven't seen all of Sean Penn's directorial ventures, and there have been many since. And from whatever I've read, and they're always at Cannes, and you know, they don't sort of really land super well from what I've heard. But this one is like really amazingly done. I will say it felt a bit indulgent to me, like in a very kind of, you know, first film sort of maker way. But other than that, I think the movie very strongly communicates his ideas, and it's beautifully rendered. Of course, he's a great actor, so he lets all the actors shine.
Oh yeah,
like some of these scenes, like everybody, Hal Holbrook we mentioned, like William Hurt just walking on the streets and just kind of, you know, kneeling down on the road. It kind of got me, you know. And especially watching this, I know how hard it is, even though all these people are trapped in whatever lives they're on, but it's not easy to bring up a family, provide for a family. Like that just doesn't happen on itself. Like you have to make sacrifices and everything, and then to sort of have your son just vanish for years and years. How tragic is that? You know, it made me so sad to see that.
Oh, definitely. And obviously his parents were not good parents. Like they did not give him or his sister the love that they needed. But at the same time, you empathize with it too, like you said. And that's the tragedy of Christopher just abandoning these people that they do care about him, even if they're not expressing the right way. Instead of trying to repair those relationships, he disregards them, and that hurts everyone that he wants love from. He's actually hurting every single one of them along the way, which is the tragedy of what he did, and the tragedy of a lot of, you know, people can fall into this trap really easily too. And I think that's also what Hal Holbrook is trying to teach him, because he also had a strained relationship with his family, and he realizes that forgiveness is a very human emotion, and something that can be very positive and helpful to the person doing the forgiving. And unfortunately, again, I at that moment, you know, at least for me, when I watched him, it's like, oh, you learn the lesson, Christopher. Like, get in the car and go back to your family? Like, why are you continuing on? Why do you still feel like you need to go to Alaska? Didn't you learn everything right from Hal Holbrook and all the other people? Why do you still need to do this? It's frustrating that he didn't immediately just go back, and then embrace his parents like in that vision, but instead could only do it in his hopes and dreams on his deathbed.
And the tragedy of it all is that I don't know if Sean Penn and the DP intended this. Like, obviously, the outdoors are beautiful, but they're not inviting or magical the way they are in the other movies that we've talked about. They are very majestic, obviously, but I think because they are from the point of view of this character, and we see Christopher like enjoy, like, I think the early parts of when he's made it to the magic bus and he's getting in a bit of a routine, and you see him enjoy the beauty around him for a little bit, but otherwise not really. Like, he's kind of on the run even through the wilderness. Like, he never really takes a moment to reflect or take in, even though he's like writing his journal, and you could argue that's a reflection of some sort. But it's a great lesson that, we as humans, we can tell ourselves that, oh, just because I made a bunch of journal entries, I'm doing the work and I'm reflecting. You may not be, actually.
Exactly.
Or you might be traveling the world and getting your passport stamped by all these exotic places, but if you haven't really made human connections or taken the time to understand where you're at, or give something of yourself and then take something of what that place has to offer, or enrich yourself in a certain way, then these are just passport stamps. They're nothing. They don't mean anything. So I think the movie does a good job of not kind of glorifying the outdoors. Like, it's from his eyes.
Right. And it's a harsh reality. Very quickly, like you said, he's screaming at the sky to give me food. I'm so hungry. Where all the animals are gone. There's no anything. And that nature is an unforgiving mother, whatever you want to call her. Like Werner Herzog said in Grizzly Man, it's like a harsh world. And that actually harmony is not what unites us. It's chaos. It's what unites man and nature is complete chaos. It's not something magical. And which I think I go back and forth between that and then, how Ang Lee presents the magical realism of Life of Pi. Like because I feel that in certain places, but it is sort of that reminder of that yes, that is part of it, but it's not everything. And there's the dangers there. And I think to your point too, like Sean Penn and his DP and this team too, the production team, just made the wilderness not look inviting. Like, I don't want to be here. This looks awful. Like, get out, like the second that he's there in Alaska, like, this is not a place you should be at all. Like, you're a kid, like go back to your parents.
Yeah. I think to your point, like it's both things. I think the onus is on you as a person. Like, we have to make those choices of how are we going to approach it. We can approach it with kindness and wonder, but then take that back into our real lives and do something with it. Or we decide to just, foolishly just make it our own and just assume that this is going to solve all of our problems or is going to be our best friend. No.
Exactly. And again, unfortunately, I think he learned this lesson too late, which is sad, but his story hopefully will help people understand this and not, inspire similar journeys, which actually, I guess in real life, a lot of kids were trying to get to that bus and died. And they actually had to get rid of, like, move the bus and take it out of the wilderness because too many people were inspired by his tale and they were dying as trying to make it. It
wasn't a cautionary tale. It was an inspirational tale.
Unfortunately for some people, it was, which is too bad. Like, they took the wrong lesson from this, I think. But fantastic film.
Yeah. What were some movies that didn't make your list, Alex, for this episode?
Yeah, for me, it was more Alaska Yukon movies. I had The Edge, which is an adventure film, White Fang, which we actually already covered on this podcast, and then some movies about mountains where, again, something else I associate with the outdoors, Everest and Touching the Void, and then Castaway. What about you?
I had Lawrence of Arabia.
Nice.
Into the Wild as well, Lost City of Z, and Hunt for the Wilder People. So I tried to, for me, like, all of it is outdoors. Like, even in my picks, like, I wanted to have like one forest, one water, and one.
I noticed that was cool. Yeah.
So all of it is outdoors in my mind. But it's interesting that for you, the mountain are sort of what represents the outdoors.
Okay, so the next episode, so next week we're actually going to be covering an actor who we associate with, adventure and outside, and that's Harrison Ford. So come back next week, we'll come back next week in your feed to do a fan letter to Harrison Ford and his
Oh,
films.
I like that.
And then after that, we're leaving the outdoors and coming back into reality and talking about coming of age. So it's the fall, a lot of back to school. The fall is also a season of change, and coming of age is a series of changes in your lives. So we're going to be covering the movies that shaped our coming of age experiences in 2 weeks.
So I hope you enjoyed the discussion today on outdoors, and it just brought us some feelings of your trips with family or yourselves in the wild, and what that meant for you. But as always, we are available on all podcast platforms, including YouTube, where you can find our reviews for each of the movies that we've covered. Please rate and review us, and don't forget to subscribe, as that really helps listeners find us. Until then, see you next time.
Goodbye.
I wish I knew how to quit you.